In this video, I'm going to interview Scott J. Marshall, the second, aka the dog dad, and we're going to talk about why kibble is not an appropriate diet for your dog. And I'm going to start by saying that we are not attacking any food company or anybody who's using and feeding their dogs kibble. We're just trying to inform you, give you some additional information and insight about dog food. In this case, we're talking about kibble and diet. So let's start, and I'm going to start with Scott, and I'm going to ask him to, first of all, start up with telling us what you think about kibble.
So I guess that just as an overall, what my thoughts are on kibble is it is, and just like Saro said, you know, and I planned on opening with this as well. This session isn't about attacking anybody that is feeding kibble. You guys love your pets just as much as we do. It's just we're feeding different things. So just with that. But as far as what kibble is and what I think about it, I think that it is something that at one time and still for a lot of people is absolutely necessary because it does provide some level of nutrition. You know, it keeps a lot of dogs fed. You know, it wouldn't be anywhere near feasible for places like shelters and rescues and that kind of stuff to feed a more species appropriate diet or anything other than kibble or canned food. So in no way do I think that kibble doesn't have a place in the world today, because it does. Because some people just can't afford the things that other people do, like home cooked and raw diets. But as a whole, I think that in one simple sentence, kibble is just not species appropriate. It is just not what dogs are designed to eat. You know, I saw in a frequently asked questions section of a new raw food supplier in California, I saw a really great statement this morning that was, you know, worms eat dirt, birds eat seeds, and dogs and cats eat raw bones, meat, and organs. And that's the truth of it. It's just not. It's necessary in some cases, and it's done great things for us, especially back in, you know, World War II times, but it's not species appropriate, and by no stretch of the imagination is it an ideal diet for cats or dogs.
Great. All right. So let's break it down and start with offering the information about why we think that kibble is not a species appropriate diet. So let's break it down, and you start again and let us know what is wrong with kibble in general.
Okay, so this is kind of because we're trying to keep this shorter, because we could go into each one of these individually, but right, because we want to make sure this is a more condensed video so it's easier for your viewers to digest. All of these can be put into one funnel, I guess you could say, whether that's carbs, whether that's starches, whether that's sugar. All of them are really, at the end of the day, when the dog's body gets done with them, they get turned into the same thing. They all get turned into glucose, whether it's a starch, whether it's a different form of carbohydrate, whether it's sugar, that form of carbohydrate, whatever it is, it ends up being turned into glucose in the body. And the dog's body does that a lot with other nutrients like protein, but it's not the same. It's a real problem to me when we are looking at these kibble brands. And again, I'm not going to mention any specific brands because it's not what the video is about. Okay, so Rodney, Habib, and Dr. Becker did a great video about the amount of sugar in kibbles these days, some of the big brands, and they're like 50% sugar, 50% sugar. Even if we look at some of these brands that are hitting the shelves now that are like, you know, they're grain-free, they're beautiful, they're awesome. Those are just as high, if not higher, in sugar than the other brands that they were looking at. And all of this is an awful, awful thing. But the major point that I want to make out of sugar is it causes all kinds of problems. And one of the big ones is it leads to things like obesity, which has its own list of associated issues like joint problems, heart issues, cardiovascular problems. I mean, the list goes on and on. So according to the American Pet Association for Obesity, I think that it's actually called, I actually have it written down to make sure I didn't get it wrong, the Association for Pet Obesity Prevention did a 2015 study and showed that 54% of dogs studied in the US were obese. More than half of them are obese and are having all these problems we were just talking about, joint, cardiovascular, respiratory, all of those kinds of things because they're overweight because of sugar. So that is one huge problem with kibble is the sugar.
And also it leads to definitely to cancer, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Sugar feeds cancer.
Exactly. Just like with people, just like all the stuff you see on the internet for humans and your Facebook feed and etc. It's what cancer lives on. It's why you see articles about, starve out the cancer, cut out the sugar. It's no different when all these sugars come into the body, the different forms of carbs, the starches, all those kinds of things come in. They end up getting turned into glucose by different processes in the body, like the liver. And that is what the cancer cells feed off of. It's an easy to metabolize, easily, and unfortunately, massively available source of fuel for these cancer cells in these dogs' body that are on these high sugar diets, which obviously is a bad thing. We know now that, and I can't remember exactly where the study comes from, so I apologize, but right now we're seeing that 1 in 2 dogs in the United States, at least, is getting cancer at some point in their life. 1 in 2. That means if you have 2 dogs and they are on kibble, the stats say that 1 of your 2 dogs at least is going to get cancer at some point. Like, how scary is that?
And again, we're not attacking any company, any food company or any dog owner. The fact that you may not know that basically you're feeding your dog a diet, a food that can lead to cancer. Now, there are dogs who, survive and they don't have any issues and they live let's say 15, 16 years of long life being fed kibble. But the fact is that we are trying to not just to let your dog to live a life, we want them to thrive. We want them to have a great life, healthy and happy life, long life, that you can enjoy your dog for longer period of lifetime. So instead of having this idea of my dog is going to live for 10 to 16 years, we want them to live 20, 25, 20, 30 years if possible. So that's the goal in general, why we are talking about kibble. And now the other thing is that I have found out that, cooking and heating the food, that kibble that they produce, actually kills all the nutritional values and nutrient that exists in the kibble. Let's say even the food company is a great food company and they mean well and they buy and source all kinds of good material and product, but the cooking and heating the food itself kills all that nutrition.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so if we're talking about, just to be clear, because there are people that do this, there's a huge difference between a massively highly processed like kibble type diet and cooking food at home. You're going to be destroying a significantly higher amount of nutrients doing a highly processed, processing thing like kibble does versus, you're cooking food at home for your dog. It's a very big difference. If you're cooking at home for your dog instead of feeding kibble, then you're doing awesome because you're still doing 10 times better than the kibble. But that's very, very true. There's a very good reason and a very specific reason why after all of this cooking happens in these kibble companies, there's a reason that synthetic vitamins and nutrients, etc., get put back into the food. And it's because they destroyed so much of it in the kibble processing process. In order to meet things like AAFCO standards, they have to put in these synthetic vitamins and minerals and etc. to make sure that they meet those AAFCO standards. And the dog's body does not look at synthetic vitamins and nutrients the same way that it does naturally available vitamins and nutrients. So if you were to take, X protein molecule, blah, 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 this X protein molecule, blah, 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 one's natural, one's synthetic, the dog's body is going to utilize pretty much 100% of the natural food and is going to utilize significantly less of the synthetic food. And the bottom line with all of that is that when you cook that, you have to add in all that synthetic stuff and it's just not the same. The dog's body doesn't see it as the same thing. It doesn't utilize it in the same way. The quality isn't there. It's just not the same thing. Just because, I mean, in order to meet a standard for AFCO, all that you have to do is be able to successfully feed 6 out of 8 dogs without losing enough body weight. If you can feed a kibble and have 6 out of the 8 dogs in the test not lose a certain percentage of body weight, then according to AFCO and everybody else, you can put that food on the market.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that look into that on your own, but that's the bottom line. Yes, synthetic stuff isn't as good, and it has to get added in at the end to meet AFCO standards so they can actually put this stuff out in the market.
Exactly. So the other reason I would say, in my opinion, again, is that dry food or kibble, it has the moisture has been taken out of the food. So dogs and any animal, they need natural moisture to thrive. And because of dry food, all the moisture has been taken out. Most dogs, they get really thirsty when they eat dry food or kibble. And I run a doggy daycare, and I see, I would say 90% of the dogs who are attending the daycare are on kibble, and I see how much water they're drinking. And first of all, it puts pressure on their bladders, in their internal organs when they're drinking a lot of water. And third of all, the water that they're drinking, it doesn't replace the moisture, the natural moisture that a food other than kibble will produce. So your thoughts on that?
I completely 100% agree. Moisture loss in dry foods is a huge, huge problem for everybody, for every mammal on the planet. I don't know about the other guys out there, but every mammal on the planet requires moisture to properly digest, utilize, metabolize food and nutrients, etc. And without that there, it causes all kinds of problems. Not even talking about metabolizing and everything else, but just being in a perpetual state of dehydration causes all kinds of problems, including things like cardiovascular problems. I mean, just everything, energy levels, all of it. It is a huge, huge problem. And it's kind of funny because people that switch from kibble over to raw food diets, all the time in my Facebook group, I have my course students ask me this all the time. They freak out because they switch their dogs over to raw food, and then it seems like to them, their dog stops drinking water because they're used to them drinking so much throughout the day, and it just seems like all of a sudden they all but stop, and they freak. They're like, something's wrong, my dog's not drinking water. They're supposed to drink water all the time, and that's because this is a super rough number, super rough, so don't get mad at me about this, but approximately 70%, looking at things like USDA numbers, approximately 70% of food meat specifically, is water. So you're looking at, that 30% being some combination of fat and protein, and then the rest of that weight is water. So if you think about all the food that your dog is eating, if it's, let's just say if it was 100 ounces of food or something like that, 70 ounces of that 100 ounces of food would be water. And when you take that out, they have to get it from somewhere else. So when we feed a species appropriate diet, the dog can take the moisture that's in the food to keep themselves hydrated, to metabolize and use the food that they are bringing in, and not be in a perpetual state of dehydration. So if you're one of those people that watches this video and then goes and switches your dog over to a raw diet, don't freak out.
Don't panic, yes.
Stops drinking water.
Right. But I'm going to give you a side tip as a dog trainer too. Many dog owners, who are feeding their, especially puppies, kibble, they have this issue of potty training or house training their dog, and they have a hard time because their dog is constantly having accidents inside of the house, or constantly drinking and peeing, and this makes it very hard to potty train puppies because the puppy has no choice. Physically, they can't hold the pee, When
it's time to go, it's time to go.
Yes. In a way, it's a chain reaction. You feed your dog kibble, dry food, your dog has no choice but drinking a lot of water, and that water has to come out, and they're going to have accidents. You're going to have a hard time constantly training your puppy potty training. So that's another reason why it's hard to potty train dogs, and it just doesn't work, especially if you have a puppy as well.
Right.
And in general, one of the first thing that I suggest dog owners to do when it comes to potty training is change the diet. And you're going to see, as soon as you change the diet, you go from kibble to raw diet, for instance, your puppy is not going to have as much as accident. And let's talk about not only pee but stool. Their stool itself, the quality changes, the smell goes away. And again, I'm going to share my thoughts here. I run a doggy daycare, and every day we see a lot of dogs pooping, and and sometimes you have to feed them as well, and we feed them like this much dry kibble food, and they poop this much.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So let's talk about that.
So really what it comes down to, and I'll try to keep this brief so we don't go over our time frame, but really what it comes down to when I talk about poop for kibble-fed dogs versus raw-fed dogs, for what the person cares about as far as the end result, we'll say, really what it boils down to is less frequency and less volume, and honestly, less stinky. So just to give you a very specific answer to this, or example, I guess, we recently puppy sat, and by recently I mean like within the last 6 months or something, but we recently puppy sat my in-laws little Shih Tzu, the little tiny guy, and we babysat him or puppy sat him for 5 hours. 5 hours. He didn't consume while he was at my house. The only thing that he did was drink water. He didn't need to be fed during the time frame that he was with us. He went, number 2, 3 times, and each time produced as much or a little bit more stool than my 100-pound German Shepherd does in a day. So they typically go once a day. My German Shepherd, I'm plugging in my laptop here. They typically go once a day. And it was the same amount that this Shih Tzu made 3 times in a 5-hour period. And it's because the body just doesn't use it the same way. They just don't.
Exactly.
Another thing that freaks new people out is their dog stops going to the bathroom as much, and they automatically go to, my dog is constipated, they're not using the bathroom, something's wrong, there's an obstruction. It's like, so basically what it all boils down to with the poop, if you switch over to raw food, what you can look forward to is less frequent poops, less volume, which means less of it, and you can look forward to less stinky poops because there's not the carbs and the sugar and everything else. I mean, when I was picking up that little guy's poop, it was like a reminder of, oh yeah, this is one of the major reasons why I do this, because this stuff stinks.
Yes. So basically what it goes in comes out. And in between, the body of your dog is not receiving all that nutrition that you hope your dog's body is getting. So in a way, you're feeding your dog just to get over that hunger. Right. And the nutrition is not there because, again, if your dog, so here's an example, if you're feeding your dog this much and your dog poops this much, just put the 2 and 2 together. So this goes in, this comes out. So nothing stays in the body, the body takes it as nutrition. So there has to be something wrong with what you're feeding. So last thing that I want to talk about again is, many people, again, they say, I buy the most expensive dry food, it says, it has all the best ingredients. And in general, when you look at any product in this day and age, you want to watch for, if you see a list of ingredients that it goes on and on forever, and it's something that you have no idea what it is, it's a warning sign. And many dog owners, they don't realize that everything that it's in that bag and it's saying and it's mentioning it is just half of what they're mentioning in a way.
Right.
Just imagine how much more stuff is in that bag. And even no matter if you buy the cheapest version or the most expensive version, it's still the same process, and it's still not beneficial for your dog.
But in my opinion, just because you spend more money on kibble does not mean you are getting a higher quality or more nutritious food. It still has massive amounts of sugar in it, 40, 50+% of sugar, and it's doing all the same bad things. It's void of moisture, full of synthetic ingredients, and just as a really quick note, and I won't go too far into this because it's kind of depressing, but it is worth looking into on your own. There is a certain chemical called pentobarbital, and that is the euthanasia drug that we use to put animals down. And there have been recalls with big brand pet foods that have kibble brands that have been recalled because pentobarbital was found in their foods. So you connect in your own mind the dots between how did the drugs that we're using to put dogs and cats down with in vet clinics, how did that drug get into your dog's dog food, your kibble? You put those two dots together yourself and look into that. But I mean, that for me is enough of a reason. I don't want my dog eating the same drug that they use to forcefully kill other dogs and cats. So if you are going to start, I want to do better for my dog, so I'm going to go spend more money on a higher end, higher quality kibble, what I would recommend doing instead is spending that extra money that you were going to spend on a higher quality kibble and start just adding in fresh ingredients to the current kibble that you're already feeding. You can get things like fresh, low glycemic veggies like kale and add that into your dog's food. And eggs and canned sardines. You just watch the sodium. But spend that extra money on fresh foods to add to your dog's current kibble instead of getting trapped by the marketing scheme of higher quality kibbles that you're just paying more for to get the same thing.
Exactly, and that will help you also eventually and slowly to phase out the kibble out of your dog's diet and hopefully go more of a fresh food diet direction. So speaking of fresh food diet, we're going to continue on our next video. We're going to talk about fresh food, which basically we're going to talk about raw diet. So hopefully in this video, our audience and our members found out the negative effects of feeding dogs kibble. And we'll continue on this series. We're going to talk about diet for dogs, healthy diet for dog, fresh food, and raw diet. And any last word before we end this video?
I guess my final thoughts would be two things. Of one, look into your food. Just take a couple of minutes Googling the food that you're feeding your dog right now. Are they going through a recall right now? Why are they going through a recall? Are they not? How much sugar, how much carbs is in there? Just do some research on the food that you are feeding now. If you choose to switch over to a raw diet, don't do it uninformed. Do something. There's courses, there's books, there's websites, there's tons of info out there. Don't go into it blind. Don't just see a pretty picture of raw food on Instagram and try and copy the bowl because that was for somebody else's dog, not your dog. So make sure that you look up your own food. Make sure that you educate yourself if you do want to switch. And if you can't switch over to raw, don't go to a higher quality kibble. Just spend that extra money on fresh foods to add into your dog's diet. Again, look into low glycemic, that part's important, low glycemic vegetables. Look into things like eggs, canned sardines from even Walmart or the grocery stores. Just keep the sodium under 100 milligrams per 4-ounce serving. So just spend that extra money adding fresh food into your dog's diet, and you will be amazed at the differences that you see with that small amount of change.
And speaking of learning, where can people learn about raw diet? And I know you run a course, online course that people can join and learn. Can you give us some information about that?
Yeah, so it's called the Raw Feeding 101 course. You can find it at rawfeeding101.com. I have an explainer video at the top, tell you a little bit about my raw feeding story and how the course came to be. But the real purpose of the course is to take that confused and frustrated pet parent that knows that fresh food is better deep down in their hearts and their souls and everything else, that they know that it's better, but they have no idea what to do. They look stuff up online and they're confused because there's 20 different answers to one question, and they're not all necessarily wrong and they're not all necessarily right. So it's really for that person that is confused, but they want to get switched over, and they just need somebody, somebody metaphorically to hold their hand through the process. So it'll take you, it won't turn you into a Dr. Karen Becker or anything like that. You're not going to be a canine nutritionist at the end. But what it will do is allow the average pet parent, the average dog owner specifically, a person that's confused and frustrated and they want to get their dog switched over, but they have no idea what to do and they need that A to Z, tell me what to do, what day, what to buy, how to feed it, how to prepare it, everything. So all that's on rawfeeding101.com.
Great, thank you very much. So we will see you next time on our next video, which we're going to talk about raw diet and everything else that you need to know about your dog's food. And I want to thank you, Scott, for being here today, and I will see you next time.
Beautiful. Thank you for having me, Saro. Looking forward to our next meeting.
I just wanted to let you know that my online dog training course is available now. It's where you can learn how to train your dog using play and praise reward system without the use of treat, food, aversive tools, force, or domination. To learn more, click here. If you want to watch another video of mine, click here. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, click here.